During our New York Virtual UX conference, Jakob Nielsen held a Q&A session where he discussed the role of accessibility in UX and how to persuade hard-to-convince audiences about the need for UX.
I think that accessibility is, to me, a type of usability. So it's a matter of a person or group of people using design. And so this is where this phrase that sometimes is differently abled. I personally hate political correctness. I don't like these weird circumscribed way of referring to things. I used to just be simple in your language. But this is actually one of those cases where that phrase differently abled actually has some value, because that's really what we're talking about here. So it's people who are using the information in a different modality, a different way. And so let's say you have a blind person. Well, that means they can't see. So that means, again, that they're getting an auditory representation of the information. Well, let's take a deaf person. Well, that means they can't hear. So now they're not getting the auditory representation. They're going to have the subtitles if you're doing video, for example. So for every one of these disabilities, you can say it's really a different type of modality, a different interaction channel, but it's still a user interface, and it's still a person using the interface to try to accomplish a task. So that's the fundamentals of usability. So it's just a different interface because it's an auditory representation of the information instead of a visual, or it's a visual instead of an auditory, or somebody who can't, motor skill impairments, they can't use the mouse, they can't use a touch screen. So now they're not using the input that you would use if you could touch in a normal way. So it's all just a different modality, but it's still an interface. It's a channel, communication channel. And so what I would like to ideally see, and this is ideal, but what I ideally would like to see would be completely treated as a usability problem. So you would say in your meeting, we want to increase our conversion rate, make more money from blind users, or we want to make more money from these other type of users. And so we've got to design better for them. And then you've got to test people who use your material with that in that modality, and you will see what problems they have, and you will see how you can make it better for them, and you would design for them. And that's a little bit similar to what you would do if you want to cater to people who are. Some people access your website from a big monitor desktop computer, other people from a small mobile phone, where you got to ideally design different interfaces for the two. Similarly, you should ideally design different user interface for somebody who can see a website with somebody who can hear the information. There's two different modalities. Now, that's ideal. Now, in practice, only very few very big and very rich organizations can actually afford to do that, because there are so many different modalities that you would have to take into account. And that, I think, is why we had that kind of fallback, which is more technical accessibility, which I don't like nearly as much, which is to say, well, we'll design for the majority of the users, and then we'll make it possible for the smaller number of people who have a different modality to still get the information. It's just never going to be as good. And that, I think, is not happy. But sometimes, again, your pragmatics come into play, and you can't afford to design a perfect interface for everybody. But that's what you ideally should do. Ideally, you should really think about it's a different modality. It's still people. They still have a task, and it's a standard usability problem. And so that's what it should be. Now, what it often becomes instead is that you check that if the information is read aloud rather than being seen, the information still appears. Like, for example, you have text as text, not as sort of a picture of text. So there's a variety of those type of accessibility guidelines that just exist to make sure the information is at all available. But that doesn't mean it's going to be easy to use, or it's communicating well, or it solves the person's problem, which is what I would like to see. And so that's what I would say would be the recommendations for those companies that either because they're rich can afford it, or because they specifically cater to an audience with a lot of disabilities, and therefore it becomes extra important for them to do that. That's what they should do. They should just treat it as a usability problem, just as any other. There are users, there are tasks, and there's communication channel, and we're going to study that.
I love kind of bringing it back to this idea of inclusive design, and just they are all people. And I feel like so much of it always comes back down to convincing others about that importance. So actually, Tara and Manisha had both kind of asked questions around persuading people about that value of UX, and how do we persuade people that there is that need for UX, maybe that need for accessibility, both inside or external in our organization, especially to people who just, are hard to convince or just aren't convinced that there is that value?
Well, I mean, I think that there are two main ways of doing it. It's like the logical and the emotional way, I guess. And so the logical way goes back a lot to KPIs, the key performance indicators, various type of metrics. That's where it's lovely if you're on the e-commerce site, because every time you improve the design, your sales really do go up. And so that should be convincing for most of the even most skeptical people. If they sell more, let's do it that way. So that's where if you can do something you can measure, and then you can roll it out again. You can measure that now it's actually better. We have various metrics have improved. That is really in many ways the ultimate, and it convinces a lot of people. And then there's the other approach, which is, I said, more the emotional approach. It's not so logical, but it's more a matter of, if you can get somebody to observe user testing and see how your users cannot use something, or they keep clicking the wrong button, and with more than one user, because one user, they could always just be an idiot, but if it's like several people still keep making the same mistake, eventually you got to acknowledge that it's not because the users are wrong, it's because you're wrong, and the design is wrong, really, right? And it doesn't have to be, people don't have to sit and watch 10 users. They can just watch a couple, and it's already very, very convincing. And if you can get them to sit and watch through an entire usability study, that's where the video clips come in very handy. And if you do a montage of, here's like 5 different users all having the same type of issue on this particular screen or something, that can often be quite compelling. So that's the two main methodologies, I guess, are convinced by logic or convinced by more emotion, like empathy, like, oh no, poor user again, the next person, oh no, the next person again, the same thing. And you keep seeing it, and you get more and more, wow, we got to fix this. And so those, I think, would be the main two approaches.